All right. Well, thank you all so much for spending some time for us to talk today about how to secure software. We're going to have some fun because we already have technical difficulties in that my camera's jacked. So I'll introduce us on camera, and then you will not be able to see me as I bring slides up. But my name's Ted Harrington, and I am an author and a leader of ethical hackers. And I'm here to share with you some lessons of what we've seen from the front lines of ethical hacking about why systems get broken and what to do about it. So let's say you're at the beach, right? You are at a beach and you bend over, you pick up a grain of sand. You throw that grain of sand back. Later, a friend of yours comes back to that same beach and picks up a grain of sand, any grain of sand. Now, what's the likelihood that it's the same grain of sand that you picked up? It's pretty unlikely, right? Now, multiply that by 1,000,000 beaches and multiply that by 1,000,000 billion Earths. And that gives you a rough order of magnitude of the improbability of being able to guess the private key that keeps cryptocurrency wallets secure. Private keys simply cannot be guessed. Or can they? Well, we did many times, in fact. We published a piece of security research looking at Ethereum wallets that discovered a flaw in how the software provisions keys. That enabled us to actually successfully predict keys 732 times. That's like picking up your same grain of sand 732 times. It shouldn't be possible once, let alone hundreds of times. Now, the logical next question is, of course, well, if these keys are what protect wallets and the currency in them, what happened to all the money in those wallets? Well, it turns out that every single unit of currency had been stolen. Every single one had been transferred out of those wallets and into a single centralized wallet owned by a thief. Of course, the logical follow-up question to that is, well, how much money are we talking about here? And that's where the story continues to get even crazier. We're not talking about a small amount of money. It turns out that it was actually over $54 million worth of Ethereum that had been stolen in the course of this theft. Next, we wanted to understand, well, how quickly do these wallets get looted? And so to verify that, what we did was we took $1 worth of our own Ethereum and we put it into one of these vulnerable wallets to see what would happen. Almost instantly, I mean, snap your fingers, and that's how quickly the money was gone. Turns out that it went to that same wallet where all the other currency had been stolen and centralized to. So the scope of this theft was really widespread, and this thief, who we later named the blockchain bandit when we worked with Wired to break the story about it, blockchain bandit showed us very powerfully a few really, really important things, because what they'd been doing is they had been exploiting these wallets.
Excuse me. Hey, Ted.
Yes.
This is Lauren, a moderator. We cannot see your deck or your screen.
I haven't started slides yet. I'm just telling the first story. So,
got it. Thank you, Ted.
Yeah, no problem. You will see me zoomed in far too closely when I come in to turn on the slides. It will be uncomfortable. What Blockchain Bandit had really demonstrated for everybody in this story was that two powerful facts. Number one, software vulnerabilities exist. And number two, attackers exploit them. And stories like this are unexpected, yet not uncommon. Things like this happen every single day. And the reason that they happen, because the question we should ask is, why do they happen? The reason is a very simple one. It's that all too often, organizations are approaching security wrong. So what I'm going to do here today is I'm going to extract some lessons and advise you on the most common ways that people get it wrong, and then replace those with how to do it right. So with that, let's dig in. I'm going to share my slide deck with you guys now. Just bear with me one second. And we're off. So everything I'm going to talk about here today comes straight out of this book that I wrote that's coming out in a couple months called Hackable. And this is a labor of love over many, many years of leading a team of ethical hackers and, from our security consulting business. And everything I'm going to talk about today you can learn more about by signing up for this book when it comes out. You can see the URL there in the lower right-hand corner. And there's a few key takeaways. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to start with the right mindset. This is where a lot of organizations actually stumble. There is this lie that many organizations believe, and that's we're good. But the truth that we need to replace it with is we could be better. Now, I'm not saying that people should lack confidence in their abilities or their capabilities, their skills, the tools, their program. No, we want that. People should be confident and we should be working hard to be good. But that alone isn't enough. The entirety of security, absolutely everything that leads to excellence, is this mindset of driving to be better, right? That no matter what the discipline is, we're talking about software today, but this applies to whether you're looking at social engineering, network security, whatever your area of focus is. The drive to be better is what leads to success in security, and without it, you will not succeed. To illustrate this, let's think about Apple, right? A company that is certainly defined by overall excellence, and they're someone who is also defined by security excellence. And if we think back to when the iPhone first came out, many, many years ago, we wanted one. Not just because they're awesome. I mean, they're awesome, so we wanted one, but also because we wanted to hack them. And we wanted to be first. Now, unfortunately, we had no advantage over anyone else, and every other security researcher also wanted to be first. Without an advantage, it felt like it was just going to be a race, and that felt like too much of a toss-up for us. So what we needed to do was figure out some way to obtain an advantage. And the theory that we leaned on was that Apple, as they moved from a desktop operating system to a mobile operating system, that they might actually port some known issues over. And it turns out that hunch proved to be correct. What we were able to find was an exploitable buffer overflow vulnerability, which gave us full administrative control of the device. We were able to activate the microphone, take pictures, add or delete contacts, anything that you could do holding the phone, we could do it. Unquestionably, this was a worst case scenario for Apple. For us, it was an exciting time. We achieved our goal. We became the first company ever to hack the iPhone. But the story isn't actually about us. The story is about Apple and what they did with that information. A lot of companies, when they receive findings from security researchers or even findings from the companies they hire, they choose not to get better. They choose not to do anything with that information. And that might sound a little defeatist, but you'd be surprised how often that happens. Apple didn't do that. Apple took the recommendations that we had about how to fix the issue, and within 48 hours, they had a patch. And that meant that the millions of people buying iPhones now were protected from this particular flaw. And that's what we all need to be thinking about as we start talking about the implementable ideas that we'll discuss later. Is you have to be striving for something better. That's what security is. It's not perfection, it's progress. Once we have the right mindset, now we have to apply the right methodology. So many of the elements that we'll talk about today assume that companies who are building software are working with companies to help them find the vulnerabilities in the software, whether that's security evaluators or security consultants or penetration testers or whatever. They're working with somebody. But the key here is how you work with that organization is critical in terms of its influence on your ability to succeed. The common lie that holds many organizations back is this idea that they want to get these real world results and the attacker doesn't have information about how the system works. And so they say, well, I'm going to withhold information. I'm not going to give to my partner the same information that I know because the attacker doesn't have that. Well, in fact, what you need to do is you actually need to provide information in order to get value. It really boils down to that distinction of information. And these two primary methodologies, one is called white box. White box is where you share information. It's what you want to do. And the other one's called black box, and it's where you withhold information, and it's what you don't want to do. And unfortunately, it's what many organizations actually try to do. To illustrate this, we can talk about a company that we worked with. And for many years, they'd only ever wanted to do white box vulnerability assessments. And then all of a sudden, they asked for a black box assessment. Now, I was a little surprised by this, and so I asked the director of product security why they wanted to change their approach on this one. And his answer was really interesting. He said, well, Ted, first of all, I definitely want to do white box because I want to actually be able to find the issues and know how to fix them, which is what white box testing does for you. It helps you really understand the problem because you understand how the system works. He said, but unfortunately, he said, my boss promised to his boss, who promised to her boss, that we would do a black box test. So it's become political now, and I have to deliver a black box test. That's a really interesting scenario. And by the way, I don't know if that sounds like any of your organizations, right? Where a bad business decision drives a bad security decision. If that sounds like you, you're not alone. It happens to companies all the time. And so as we thought about how can we help them unravel this scenario, what we did was we decided, let's do both. So on the same system with the same amount of effort, we did a black box test and a white box test. In the black box test, which again, no information sharing. They did not provide access to engineers or source code, design diagrams. We didn't know anything about how the system worked. We allocated 200 person hours. As a result, we found 4 vulnerabilities. 2 of the vulnerabilities the customer already knew about. All of that time, effort, and money was a complete waste for the customer because they already knew about that stuff. And with black box, they're not telling us anything that they know. The third issue was a misunderstanding by us of how the system worked. So that was also of no value to the customer because it wasn't really an issue. It was a misinterpretation of why an input produces an output. The fourth issue was, in fact, a critical, previously unknown security vulnerability, and that was very valuable to the customer. Unfortunately, we didn't know how the system worked, so we couldn't tell them how to fix it. So the outcome of it was this: 200 person hours equals 1 vulnerability and no solutions to the vulnerability. Then we moved into the white box portion. Now, this is where they shared information, they shared design diagrams, we talked to the engineers, we understood how the system worked. Same 200 person hours, but instead of 1 issue, we found 21. The exact same system, the same level of effort. The only difference was the information within the existing time constraint. For every single one of those issues, because it was white box, we knew how the system worked, we could advise how to fix it. So compare those side by side, 200 person hours either way, but in one of them, you only get 1 issue and no fixes, but the other, you get 21 issues and 21 fixes. That's why we need to understand the relationship between information and value. Okay, now once we've figured out what we're trying to achieve with getting better and how to actually work with your outside partners, now you need to make sure you get the right thing. One of the biggest problems in security today is that terms that mean different things are used interchangeably. They absolutely should not be because they're different things. The most common one of those is, of course, penetration testing, within the umbrella, of course, of different types of security testing. Penetration testing has sort of become the catch-all that means kind of anything. But many organizations actually mean something else when they're using that term, yet they don't realize how this term is being inappropriately applied. So here's what's crazy. When people are asking for penetration testing, what they're usually provided is something different. They're usually provided vulnerability scanning. Yet what they actually need is yet a third thing altogether, which are vulnerability assessments. Those are 3 remarkably different things. They provide different outcomes, and they require different investments of time, effort, and money. So they can't be used interchangeably. To draw a metaphor here, penetration testing would be like when an automotive manufacturer wants to know how the car will perform in terms of safety in a specific situation. And so let's say it's a head-on collision they want to understand. So they'll literally crash the test against a car. Crash the car against a wall. So they now know in that specific scenario what the result will be. That's kind of what penetration testing is like. It's looking at a specific scenario and really thoroughly testing that specific scenario. But usually what's provided is vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability scanning is kind of like when that check engine light comes on in your car and you go to the mechanic and they stick in that diagnostic tool and it comes back with a code that says, okay, here's what's causing this and here's how you clear it. That's essentially what a vulnerability scan is like. It looks for common known issues that has signatures and fingerprints that it can look for. And that's what's crazy about those terms, right? When someone's saying, hey, I want to know what happens when this car crashes into a wall, they're being provided the scan of how to turn off the check engine light. Those are really different. Yet what most organizations are needing is vulnerability assessments, which are a more comprehensive, rigorous, and thorough approach that sort of looks at the whole system and says, how do all these things work together? What are all the different vulnerabilities? What's the severity of those vulnerabilities? And how do I fix it? So to extend our car metaphor, this would be like the entire safety engineering department at the automotive manufacturer. They consider things like the headlights and the safety belts and the side impact airbags and things like that, and say, how do all of these systems work together? Because ultimately the goal is to make sure that the valuable asset, which is the person, the driver, the passenger, is going to survive on impact. That's why we need to really, really understand that there is a difference. Penetration testing is not the same thing for everything. And for most people, actually, penetration testing isn't even what you need. Next thing we need to do is we need to actually find the vulnerabilities. We need to hack the system. Now, this is where the ethical hackers amongst us really get to have the fun and sort of flex our muscles. And this is where we're finding the vulnerabilities. Now, here's the lie that holds many organizations back. Some of you may have even mentally checked out at this point, and hopefully you didn't, but you might have already said to yourself, yeah, I'm doing security testing. I've got penetration testing on lock. I do external penetration testing. I'm good. But almost all security testing that exists today doesn't go deep enough. Now, one of the things that I present in my book is this image. If you can imagine a triangle, and the bottom of the triangle is sort of the foundational elements. And those are the things that you start with. And in fact, running a scanner tool, like we talked about, sort of that diagnostic scan, that's one of the things you want to start with. But that's where most security testing actually stops today, unfortunately. Where the most important vulnerabilities are found, where the issues that wind up putting companies in headlines, those types of issues, they're not found by scan tools. They're found by techniques that require manual emphasis by deeply seasoned and deeply experienced experts who can do some unexpected things like abuse functionality, chain exploits, and find unknown unknowns. Yet most testing doesn't do that. There's no way to automate that type of testing. It actually costs more time and money to do that, but that's the only way to find the stuff that matters. To give you an example to illustrate what one of those ideas is, let's talk about functionality abuse. So abusing functionality is taking the way that a system works and making it behave differently within that existing functionality. And a great example of this is a very famous online game hacker who goes by the pseudonym Manfred. Now, for literally decades, what Manfred would do is he would exploit the way that online games treat their in-game currency. Now, for those of you who aren't really into online gaming in any way, the fundamentals are that there's, if you can imagine, almost like a banking system in the game. And what the banking system is for is you accumulate currency and you can use that to buy things like a weapons upgrade or a skills upgrade or access to a secret level. And it essentially computes things like this. It'll say your account balance minus whatever the cost is of what you're trying to upgrade with equals your new balance. And what's interesting is these systems, they treated those numbers as positive integers, right? Like 500 minus 100 equals 400. What Manfred did was he abused that assumption about the positive integer. And he said, well, what if I can input negative integers? So he found a way to exploit vulnerability that enabled him to do that. And so what he would do is 500 minus negative 100. And as we all learned in middle school, when you subtract a negative number, it's actually addition. So it'd be 500 minus negative 100 equals 600. So he would grow his in-game currency. He would, of course, acquire whatever it was that he was buying, and then he could turn around and sell that in-game currency in secondary markets for real money. The developers did not want it to work that way, yet nevertheless it did. And the only way to find something like that is by abusing functionality. You can't automate it. You can't run a scanner against it. You really need to actually break the system. Once you find your vulnerabilities, you need to actually fix them. Now, this almost seems so straightforward that it begets the question, well, doesn't everybody do that? No, you'd be shocked. Everybody does not fix their vulnerabilities. It still is a head scratcher to me, but you have to do it. A big reason that people don't fix their vulnerabilities is they're afraid of the workload, right? They get this list of vulnerabilities and they say, oh man, I don't have the budget for that. I don't have the time for that. This is gonna be a pain. This is gonna divert my developers from current development priorities. It's gonna take forever. I won't be able to get to this till next year. And those are all valid concerns to have. And my heart goes out to organizations who have to deal with that, because those are true business constraints that you have to account for. But the beauty is that if you have the right approach, you can actually manage the remediations within your existing development plan. And the process is fairly simple. There's 3 steps to it. You need to prioritize vulnerabilities by severity. Then you need to remediate the vulnerabilities, and then you need to verify the remediations. Those 3 steps, each of which has some concrete actions to them, are how you manage this workload. Now, I'm not going into depth on any of these ideas right now because, of course, this is a closing keynote, and so we're sort of talking about ideas. But any one of these ideas I could go into more depth on. Just reach out to me or pick up the book, whatever is easier for you, and I can help advise you on how to take action on these. A great example of this is a customer of ours who's building this piece of software that, after a few rounds of assessment, it turns out had a listening service open to the internet. Now, that meant that any attacker from anywhere in the world could access, could send a command to the application servers. One of the commands that it would respond to was to delete files. Now, this particular solution hosted enormously valuable intellectual property. Deleting it would be catastrophic for both this business as well as their customers who were entrusting their information to this company. So it needed to be fixed right away. And they did. So we advised them how to fix it. This was, of course, the most severe and most significant urgent item they should fix. They fixed it. Then they came back to us to verify the remediation. Now, what was interesting was the vulnerability was solved for, but a more nuanced attack scenario still existed. The attack requirements were much, much, much higher. So the vulnerability severity was much lower, but the outcome would still be the same. The impact would be the same. An attacker could delete files. But because of this process, they were able to actually fix that issue too. And so now they could move forward with confidence that this was no longer an issue. And it's all because they went through this process of prioritizing the vulnerabilities by severity, fixing the vulnerabilities, and then ultimately verifying the remediations. And there's a whole element to this about how can you build the remediation plan in your development roadmap. And it's sort of beyond the scope of what we'll talk about today. But the short answer is you can spread it out. You don't need to do everything immediately on day one. There are ways to earn yourself some time. Okay, now once we fix the vulnerabilities, are we done? No. Now we need to hack it again. A lot of organizations think about security as if it is a linear process. Start with step A, then we go to step B, then we go to step C, then we're done. And once I'm done, I'm good. Unfortunately, that's not the way that security works. Security is not a line. Security is a loop. It's a never-ending process. There is no finish line. Now, that's a bummer because you realize you're signing up for something that you can't ever just be done with. But nevertheless, that's the reality of it. Once we accept it, we can keep moving forward. And the way that we deal with this is by continuing to find those vulnerabilities and go through that cycle over and over again. Find the vulnerability, fix them. Find the vulnerability, fix them, and so on. There's a company that we work with who is exceptional at translating the results of security assessments into successful and effective engineering practices. They're so good at it. And it got to a point where by the time we were on the 12th round of reassessments, and that's when you do the security assessment again, by the time we were on the 12th round of reassessments, there were no more vulnerabilities that we could find within scope. Now, it didn't mean vulnerabilities didn't exist. It just meant that we were at the point of diminishing returns. Same for the 13th and 14th rounds, there are just no issues. It was awesome. They literally could take these issues and translate it into building better, more secure solutions. On the 15th round, we discovered a really catastrophic issue. Essentially, they'd moved from an on-premises architecture to leveraging cloud solutions, and they did it wrong. And as a result, it meant that an attacker could visit their cloud storage, enumerate the file system, and access any of the files on it. Now, this particular customer deals in very, very sensitive and very sensitive financial information. And had regulators found that they were out of compliance, the fines would have been enormous. But that didn't happen. They were able to find the issue before it became a multi-million-dollar liability for them, and they could fix it. And that's the benefit of why you want to keep continually trying to find those vulnerabilities, because as you change the solution, which you will change the solution, as you change it, you change the attack scenario. You have to keep finding the vulnerabilities because they will continue to be introduced. Next, we need to spend wisely. I hear these 3 words every single day. Security is expensive. Security is too expensive. Security costs too much. You know, whatever the version is of these 3 words, I hear it every day. That's neither true nor untrue. The reality, though, is you get what you pay for. Now, you could actually do security for pretty close to nothing. But would you actually be delivering security? Probably not. You also could invest millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars every year. And would you be completely free of any security vulnerabilities? And would that be a good use of your time and money? Probably not. What you need to do is find the happy balance in between, right? You need to find that the Goldilocks, right? Where she found the porridge, one was too hot, one was too cold, one was just right. That's what you're looking for. A common way to think about this, security is expensive, so I'm just going to try to spend less on it, is to think about this metaphor, right? Let's say you're in New York, you need to get to Los Angeles. What's the most effective way to do that? You want to buy a seat on a commercial airline. It's going to cost you a few $100s. It's going to take you a few hours, and you'll be there. But there is another way. Rollerblades. You could strap on rollerblades. They're a mode of transportation, and you could get from point A to point B. But that's ridiculous. I mean, we all know that would just be stupid, right? Neither your body nor the rollerblades are built for that kind of journey. And even though it is a mode of transportation, it's not a mode of transportation that helps you achieve your goal. That's the way that you need to understand how you spend, right? Risk drives effort. Effort drives cost. It must go in that order. How much risk you're willing to take, you determine first. That dictates how much effort to invest. That dictates what the expense is. It's the effort that's variable, not the price. You can't do it the other way around. If you start with cost and try to minimize it, all you're doing is reducing effort, and all that does is increase the risk that you're accepting. By the way, in the book, I give you very specific and concrete guidelines about how to actually establish what that rate of spending should be in your particular context. Next, you need to establish your threat model. So your threat model is essentially your plan that helps you understand how you're going to secure your solution. It is often dismissed and ignored because people believe this. We take security seriously. Now, I actually don't dispute that people who say these words believe that about themselves. I think they do believe that when people say this, even though it's ironically one of the leading statements in a breach notification letter, I do actually believe that people mean it when they say it. But it's hollow. It doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't do anything for establishing what you need to do. Instead of thinking or even saying that you take security seriously, what you need to do first is understand the battle. You need to understand the battle you're in so you know how to fight it. And that's what a threat model does for you. It identifies what you want to protect, who you need to defend against, and the ways in which you'll be attacked. Those are the 3 key elements of what a threat model is. They are how you determine how much money and effort to spend, where to invest it, and the likelihood that you need to be worried about certain types of issues. Yet most organizations don't know what this is or have one implemented at their organization, and you simply can't win without it. A few years ago, I found myself in this narrow alley staring directly into the eyes of this pissed off bull. And this bull is charging at me at full speed. Now, for any of you who have heard of the running of the bulls in Pamplona, Spain, that's where I was. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, the idea is members of the general public, including knuckleheads like me, can go stand directly in front of some pissed off bulls and try to run away from them. I mean, even saying it out loud, it's ridiculous, but nevertheless, that's what it is. And that's what I was doing. And I find myself deciding it's time to start running away from this bull. And so I sort of jog over to the side and start climbing this fence to safety. And two things alert me that something is amiss. The first is the look of sheer terror on my friend's face, looking back at me. And the second is this hot whoosh of air as the bull runs directly underneath me. I thought I was, many, many yards ahead of him, and it turns out he was a split second behind me. I had grossly misunderstood the situation I was in. I didn't understand the bull's strength, that the bull is fast. I grossly misunderstood my strengths in context of the bull's strength. It doesn't matter how fast I am. I'm pretty slow compared to a bull. I didn't adequately consider the assets I'm trying to protect, my butt. I didn't want to get stabbed in it. These are the kinds of things that you're thinking about in your threat model. You're understanding who your attackers are, what motivates them, what their qualities and characteristics are. You're identifying what you're trying to protect and why that attacker wants to get that from you, and then the ways in which you might be attacked. Now we need to build security in. A common misconception, a common belief that people have is that security is something that comes later. Let's build this thing. Let's see how it works. Let's see how our customers respond to it. Let's see how the market responds. Then we'll get to security. But you actually need to secure as you develop. And one of the things that holds a lot of organizations back is they think that security slows them down. They don't recognize that security is actually itself a core feature of the solution. It's something that your customers actually require. And this idea that security slows me down is so wrong because it's narrow and short-sighted. It's looking at, in the next few weeks, will I have to invest a little bit of effort in security? Maybe, but it's not as hard as you think. If you don't, however, that's where you really get slowed down. The data shows that an issue that is introduced during the design phase that isn't addressed until after deployment costs 25 times the person power to fix. Now, that's not talking about writing a check to your security consultant. That's talking about lost productivity of your own people. The thing that should have taken 1 hour just took 25 hours to fix. And we have a customer who didn't join our services until many years after deployment. And once we started getting into looking at their solution and understanding what the issues might have been, unfortunately, we discovered that the system was so flawed, they actually needed to start over. It was used, and it continues to be used in online banking, and it's just not strong enough to protect money. Attackers want your money, and something like this just wasn't strong enough to protect it. So our recommendation was hard to give them, and it was hard for them to hear. They'd spent years and millions of dollars developing this solution. And yet here they were being told they needed to start over. Now, if that's not a gut punch, I don't know what is. And I have so much empathy for them. My heart goes out to them. I mean, I wish that they had gotten this advice, because the way to change their solution is something that could have easily been addressed in like less than an hour as whiteboarding it out when they're thinking about how they wanted to develop it. And then they could have invested the years and millions of dollars in something more viable. But now they have to start over. And what I think the key takeaway here is for the rest of you to hear a story like that and say, how can we turn this bad thing into a good thing? And the way we do that is by learning the lesson from them, by saying, if we build security in, we actually will avoid the huge effort expense that comes later when we have to deal with the issues that we don't realize we're making right now. There's a whole other element of detail that we can go into as we talk about this. And again, this is outlined in the book, or I can just share it with you if you ever want to contact me directly. But how do you do that? There's actually concrete steps you can take at each stage of the development process that dovetail perfectly with what you're already doing and really don't add a lot of effort or timeline to what you're doing. And then finally, the ultimate outcome. Now, of course, this only applies if you're in the business of, the commercialization of software. So if you're building software to sell to an enterprise or some other customer, including if your software is running on, say, a medical device or whatever, security done right actually delivers the business benefit that it helps you win sales. Now, of course, the advice is a little bit different if you're a buyer of secure solutions, et cetera. But I'm, speaking to people who are building software right now, this is the common lie that people think, that security is a tax. And like any tax, you want to minimize it. But the truth is, security is an investment. And like any investment, what you put in is what you get out. Security done right does a few powerful things for you. It enables you to earn trust, gain a competitive advantage, and help your customers realize that they want to buy your solution. But you have to do it right. There's two parts to this. You have to secure the solution, then you have to prove it. Those are two different things. They're difficult, both of them, but you have to do both. And one of the things that's really wrong with security today is people try to skip the first part. They try to skip the security part, and they try to just say they're secure. They'll use claims like, oh, we use bank level encryption or military grade security, or we have this profound program of external penetration testing, whatever it is. But put yourself in your customer's shoes. What your customer wants is they want to know, by using this solution, how likely am I to be compromised as a result? You want to address that fear and you want to deal with it because your customer has it, and security done right helps you do it. The perfect illustration is one of our customers whose their product was found to have an authentication bypass vulnerability in it. Now, that meant that any attacker could essentially just not log in and they would access the system. Now, I'm oversimplifying it. There's, of course, more complexity to it than that. But that's essentially the idea. Authentication bypass meant they could just get right in to the most valuable parts of the solution. This is a critical vulnerability. It's one of the ones that's sort of as bad as it gets. This organization didn't hide that flaw. They highlighted it. So what they did was, once they fixed the issue, now it became part of their sales and marketing narrative. They went to their customers and they said, look at this, right? Which probably sounds counterintuitive to a lot of you, right? You want to say, oh, we have a clean bill of health. There's no vulnerabilities. No, that's the wrong way to do it, because your customers know that's not true. They're not stupid. They know that vulnerabilities exist. It's a reality of software development. So when someone comes to them and says, here's how deep I go, here's how rigorous my process is, here's all the issues that I found, here's how I fixed them, here's what else is coming on my roadmap, and here's my continued investment in security moving forward. So once you work with me, you know that you'll keep getting the security enhancements that I'm promising you today, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. That's really compelling. And when other organizations can't do that, it shines in stark contrast. So this customer of ours who had this authentication bypass vulnerability and was able to present it as actually a benefit, it resonated. And they wound up signing tons of customers, because those customers could now say, got it. I understand what these guys do for security. I understand that they don't just say it matters to them. They live it. They demonstrate it. Now we can go back to talking about the business advantage I'm going to get out of using this piece of software. That's what you want. That's amazing when you can get to that point. And security helps you do that. And since most buyers actually want security, and most people selling solutions can't prove it, that puts you in an incredibly advantageous position to take advantage of security as a differentiator. So as we wrap up, a couple of resources for you. I mentioned that these ideas are coming from a book. Here's the URL, hackablebook.com. It's coming out in early December. And I'd encourage you to go there and get on the wait lists. You'll be first to be notified when it's actually available for purchase. If you need advice on any of these ideas, feel free to reach out to me. There's my company's URL, ise.io. My email address is just ted@ise.io. And whatever advice I can give you, I'd be happy to, and point you in the right direction, even if we're not the ones, who can help you. But my goal here is that you can solve these problems. So whichever way I can help you do that, use me as a resource. So with that, as we come to a close here, and I'll be happy to take questions before we wrap up, I pass the baton to you. Ideas are only as good as their implementation, right? Ideas are nice, but unless you go do something with them, it doesn't really help you that much. So here's my counsel to you. Go back to your organization and start thinking about what you learned about today. Talk about these ideas with your peers, with your boss, with your direct reports, with your customers, and start figuring out which of these things are you maybe sliding into that lie category where maybe you didn't realize it, and start thinking about what do you need to do in order to shift into the truth category. For any of this, whatever advice you need, I'm a resource for you. Our relationship does not end as this talk concludes. Here's my contact information. I will respond. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know that you guys are doing a thankless job, right? Security is often measured as we didn't get hacked yet. So let me be the one to say thank you. What you're doing matters. People rely on you, even if they don't realize it. So go take action. Keep putting in the good fight. You're doing good work. There are people out there like myself and my peers who want to help you. Let's all get better together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ted. That was terrific. Sorry, Tim, for the TED Talk. That was terrific. And please feel free to use the Q&A tab right now to submit any questions that you might have. Tim, I do have a few questions that came through, but I do want to wait to be sure that we give people some time to input those. First one right off the bat that I have is this one here. It says, is the insider threat a single attacker or multiple attackers, and why?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. Many people think about the insider threat as if it's one idea, when in fact, the insider threat is a collection of ideas. There's actually 4 types of insiders. They are the accidental insider, which is the person who just does something dumb, right? Clicks that link or plugs in that USB thumb drive. We published a piece of research in healthcare where one of the elements of the study was we just sprinkled USB drives around a parking lot, and within 24 hours, they were plugged in all over the hospital, including into medical devices and all kinds of stuff they shouldn't have been plugged into. So that stuff happens all the time. So that's the accidental insider. The opportunistic insider is someone who isn't necessarily malicious, but if an opportunity presents itself, they will take advantage of it, right? They'll attack the organization if they think they won't get away, they won't get caught. They can get away with it. The third type is the disgruntled insider. So that's someone who was a good member of the team, was loyal, and something happened, right? They got passed over for a promotion, or maybe they changed their political beliefs, whatever it is, they're angry and they set out to harm the organization. And then the fourth type is a malicious insider, which joins the organization in order to harm it. So they might be a member of a nation state or organized crime or one of the other groups that are typically considered external attackers, but they actually try to get insider status, which is what most of the more sophisticated attackers are trying to do, is get that insider knowledge. And the reason this matters is that you defend against each of them differently. They have different motivations, different capabilities, access different resources. So it is really, really important that you understand they're different and you think about them differently.
Great. Thank you, Ted. Just a quick question or a quick point before we go to the next question. If we could just ask everyone to take a quick second to do the one question poll on how much you enjoyed the session, that would be really helpful to us. And let's see here, we have a few more questions that came in. What does it truly mean to think like an attacker?
Ooh, I like that question. what does it mean to think like an attacker? Yes. So the core premise to how you find vulnerabilities is you need to think like an attacker. And essentially that means that you have to think about how a system is supposed to work and then make it do something different. So a normal person might look at a line, right? Like let's say you're at a line at a bar or an amusement park or whatever. You see that this system says I wait in this line and then I show my ID at the end of the line and I pay a cover charge. That's what a normal person does. They say, well, I get in line. That's how the system works. But an attacker looks at how the system works. They identify the same things, right? Oh, there's a line. I prove my identity at the end. I pay a fee in order to get in after that. But now they try to see, how can I make it do something different? And so an attacker might look at that and say, well, how can I talk my way in through the VIP line? How can I maybe join a group who is at the front of the line? Things like that. And so that's really the fundamental difference, is that normal people look at things and understand how they're supposed to work, and attackers look at things and try to understand how they're not supposed to work, and then they do those things.
Great. Thank you, Ted. I think we have time for one more quick question, and that is, what role do outside security experts play?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Sort of woven throughout everything that I had talked about today is this assumption that a key element to building secure solutions is, of course, working with outside entities to help you. And the reality is that you can't do security entirely in-house, but you also can't entirely outsource it either. Security is a team sport. You need both. You need in-house capabilities and you need external capabilities. And what the external capabilities do is they deliver things like independence from any of your biases or politics that happen within your organization. They, of course, provide breadth and depth of skills that you might not have in-house. They have that the perception of they're neutral, and it should be more than perception. They are neutral, so that when you turn around and you get to that last part that I mentioned about trying to use security in your sales process, your customer wants to know what an objective, neutral third party thinks. So these are the things that an outside expert helps bring to the table. And in-house, you bring things like you can make that organization more efficient, more effective. You can provide information to them. You make sure that they understand what matters to you. You are able to advocate for what needs to be done and the way it needs to be done within the, political winds that happen within any organization. And that's how the two really combine. They multiply each other's impact. You can't have one without the other. You can try, and many have, but you wind up actually not being able to succeed without doing both.
Great, thank you. So I think this is the time that we're going to wrap everything up. As a reminder, please take a moment to complete the quick one question poll if you could. Ted, thank you so much for taking the time to present to us today. We really appreciate that. And thank you to everyone for joining us today as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Let's go get better together.